Last week you should have done some work independently. I did give you a couple of weeks to get caught up in case you could not make up for the holiday immediately. But you did have some assignments last week to do, and I sent out a message through Moodle to you. Hope you're all signed up for Moodle, or you're not getting messages, and you're not able to do your homework either. So if you're not signed up for Moodle, get there. And if you need some help, let me know. So last week you were supposed to do kind of an overview. And this video that we started to watch is also kind of an overview video. So if you if you didn't do everything you were supposed to do last week, you can kind of get caught up with this video, more or less. At least as far as the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People go. Not necessarily, there are other questions that were on last week's quiz that if you, they may show up on the final exam also, so you should watch the other videos. But this will at least get us kind of caught up with the basics of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The person you're watching is the author of that book, Stephen Covey. I had the pleasure of meeting him in Kazakhstan, of all places. He came to Kazakhstan and he met with a group of business people there, and they each paid him $3,000 to spend with one day in a seminar of his. So his advice and his principles are very highly respected. He has been paid to consult with presidents and prime ministers and people like that around the world as well, in showing them and teaching them and explaining to them how to be more effective as leaders. So, and as we've talked about before, ultimately his book has now been published in close to 40 languages, and about 40 million copies have been purchased around the world. Anyway, when he came to Almaty, Kazakhstan, and gave his presentation to the business people, I was fortunate that I could not afford the $3,000, but he came and spent about 3 hours with a group of us who were from his same church that he belongs to, and from the same university where he taught, stuff like that. So it was a great pleasure to hear from him personally. The first principle, the first of the habits that he talks about, is the habit of proactivity. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. As I said, there's some foundational stuff that you should be studying from last week, and that is also being shared on this video that is your homework for this week. So I encourage you to get caught up with that stuff and stay caught up. But before I got started, this last week, there was a message going through Facebook that I downloaded. And in fact, I guess I will go ahead and show this. Let me go back to the essence of it is does the GPA matter? It may matter to your parents, but they did a study of 7,000 millionaires in America, and their average GPA was 2.9. So probably most of you are pretty close to that, if not over that. Maybe if you have a 4.0, you have no chance of being a millionaire. No, not really. But what they did find is that basically becoming a millionaire is about as likely as, like rolling the dice. There's no correlation. Essentially no correlation with your GPA and becoming a millionaire. Now, many of us don't really care if we're millionaires, so that's not the only goal in life. But what they're really trying to say is your success in life, whatever your goal is, whether it's becoming a millionaire or, whatever it is, becoming an award-winning author, or whatever your goal is in life, your GPA probably doesn't matter. It may matter if you want to become a professor, because you have to get someplace, you have to get accepted into, other advanced programs and stuff like that. But that's about it. That is about the only place it really matters, is if you want to be a professor. And professors are not the most successful people in the world. I think I already told you about my brother who, is very rich, and me that's very not rich. Okay, he took 1 year of university, and I have my doctorate. He's doesn't write anything more than email, basically, and company reports, and I've written books and many book chapters and stuff. The sort of intelligence that we emphasize in academia is not necessarily the intelligence that will make you successful in your lives. There's two different types of, or there are different types of intelligence. This Howard Gardner of Harvard concluded there were at least 8 different types of intelligence, and maybe 13, and most of them are not measured in school, and in some cases not encouraged in school, such as social intelligence. My brother is a millionaire because he has high social intelligence. People love being around him. He has a great sense of humor. He basically, like I said, he has high social intelligence, means he has great relationships with people. And he's turned those relationships, not in a bad way, not as Covey suggested, not by manipulating people, but by just being friends with people and doing, and whatever he promises them, he keeps his promises. So he does the sorts of things that Covey talks about. And so more and more people have come to trust him. And so, last year he told me he paid $1 million in income tax. Well, if he paid $1 million in income tax, he made more than $1 million in 1 year. I may have made $1 million in my whole life, so, and I don't have much of it left. So intelligence as measured by schools and universities does not mean success, does not correlate with success. As I said, it's a roll of the dice. The correlation is almost nil. But there are attributes, this video actually does suggest, that do correlate a lot with success. Not in this study, but another one, they said that just positive thinking, even though we kind of scoff at it sometimes, but a positive personality, a positive attitude correlates much more highly with success than the GPA. That's one thing. I don't think that's mentioned in this video. Let me go. This recording system is such that I've got to play with it a little bit. So the kind of stuff they were talking about in this video was, the passion, and maybe a little bit of greater focus than the high achieving student has. I think it's probably a little more complicated than that. They measured a few things here, but even Stephen Covey, by the way, he wrote a book called The Eighth Habit. And the eighth habit was essentially passion. Is how, what are you passionate about? How do you want to change the world? And so his 8th habit, that's not part of this book, but part of a different book, we'll talk about that later in the semester, is kind of more or less what they're finding here. Is that it's passion. What would you do if you weren't paid? What would you enjoy doing? What would you want to do if you had your basic needs met somehow, but nobody was going to pay you to do this thing that you wanted to do? What would you do? And those are the people who end up changing the world because they're following their passion, not the pursuit of a GPA. There's a I wanted to run another video too, as long as I've come out of the show mode. I will go and I think I will show 2 of them here real quick. This one kind of correlates with this one. I was going to show this at the end of the presentation, but this one kind of correlates with this little Facebook video that we saw. So let's go ahead and listen to Will Smith, the actor and singer and whatever. He does everything he wants to do.
Honestly, as I can say it to you, I truly...
So proactive is essentially the opposite of reactive. Reactive means you're you're going to respond according to stimulus. So if somebody hits you, you hit them back. If somebody, whatever it is, if you're hungry, you eat. If whatever it is you want, you respond to that stimuli just like other animals do. Okay, so animals respond to stimuli. Now you can train an animal. I may have mentioned this before, but there's a video I've seen where they trained a rat to play basketball. Now he didn't just wake up one morning and think, gee, I'm going to play basketball. But they trained him little by little so that first off, when he got close to this ball, they would give him a treat. And then after a while, they didn't give him a treat for that anymore. He had to pick up the ball. So then once he picked up the ball, now they gave him a treat. Then they stopped giving him a treat until they moved it closer to this basket. He still didn't know the purpose of it, but he moved the ball closer to the basket. He got a treat. So now he learned he had to go close to that basket. And then he gave it a little bit closer, and so then they stopped until he got closer still. And then closer still until he finally, they got him to put the ball in the basket. So they taught a rat how to play basketball. He had no idea what he was doing, but they taught him to go through the motions of playing basketball. So you can train animals by providing the right stimuli to do all sorts of strange things, and we see it in circuses all the time. But they're not deciding to do that. They're being trained to do that by the use of stimuli, and tying stimuli to incentives, some sort of reward system, and so forth. So kind of the Pavlov dogs, you probably heard about that, where basically, they start salivating and they come running when you ring the bell. They learn that the bell means food. And so they automatically do that. You can do that with any animal, essentially. So this is talking about the opposite of that, being proactive, and why it's important to be proactive. And the 90-10 rule, in essence, is it acknowledges there's about 10% of the things happen to you in your life that you have no control over. It admits that. But it suggests that 90% you do control. Even though you have some bad experiences, you ultimately control about 90% of your life. And this is the demonstration of that. So I'll turn this one on. Now what this last video demonstrated was some of the negative things that happen in our lives because we don't exhibit proactivity in choosing our reaction to things. But proactivity also relates to positive things. What do we do in life that are positive? A person who has, faces whatever challenge they might be. One person kind of responds, I can't do anything about this. This is screwing up my life, and they just kind of give up. Where somebody else says, I'm going to do something about this. Whatever it might be, they decide they can do something about whatever problem it might be. And so they go after it, and that's called proactivity. They go out to change whatever the situation is. They go try to change it. Let's skip through some of these that I already talked about. Dr. Covey, for those that were here when I showed the other video, started talking about the maturity continuum. And so he talked about the difference between dependence, independence, and interdependence. Dependence is basically everybody take care of me. The ultimate example is a baby, but there are a lot of people who are still dependent when they get older. They still want people to take care of them. So we need to mature out of that. The independence is, again, it doesn't all happen all at once, but independence is I take care of myself. I'm self-reliant. I'm able to handle things in my life. But as he pointed out in his video, that isn't the key to success. That's not where you achieve the greatest amount of success, is not being independent, is becoming interdependent. So the 7 habits takes us all the way, or teaches us habits that get us all the way to the top, where we're most likely to achieve success. Like my brother, was interdependence. It's not, yes, he's independent, but he's also interdependent. He has excellent relations with people, which happens to lead to financial success. So that's key to his success, is getting up to the top level of having high interdependent skills. But we're still, for our purposes today, we're down here with habit 1 of being proactive. So we're not going to talk about the interdependent habits for a couple of weeks, at least not very much. But the very basic, as you mentioned, these kind of go in order. They're an important order, because with proactivity, if you don't believe that you can change the world, kind of like we've just been talking about with what Will Smith was saying and so forth, if you don't think that you can change your world anyway, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to go on to habit 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, or his new one, his last one, 8, because you don't believe you can change anything. You're just saying, the world happened to me. I can't control it. My parents didn't raise me right. I didn't go to a good school. Whatever excuse you have, you are basically succumbing to the attitude that the world controls you. You don't control the world. And that's, of course, a reactive attitude, not instead of a proactive attitude. So we're going to talk about proactivity. Oops. A lot of what we see, a lot of what controls us is our social mirror, how other people see us. In fact, there was a study that actually Dr. Covey mentions in one of his videos, helped form his 7 habits, helped change his life. He has a bunch of kids. He had like 10 kids. I think it is exactly 10, but I'm not sure. It might be 11, might be 9, I don't remember. But he has about 10 kids. And his kids are high achievers. And one of them, though, when he was young, was not a high achiever. He was bombing at everything. He was not doing well in school. He was just, again, he was just barely starting school, but he wasn't learning how to read and stuff very well. And they'd take him out to baseball, and he would swing the bat before the ball even got to the plate. He was clumsy, uncoordinated, and they were a little bit embarrassed about him. And so they would do everything they could to help him, but nothing seemed to work. And then he read about a study. It was really a study about an accident that happened in England. In this accident, the kids in a class all took a test, and then they were sent back. The testing company sent them back the results, and they got the results mixed up. And they told the kids who did the worst in this test that they did the best. And they told the kids that did the best in the test that they did the worst. I said this was not a clinical trial. This was a mistake. But lo and behold, what they noticed when they finally got the correct results 2 months later is that during those 2 months, the worst students were doing the best, and the best students were doing the worst. And so that's part of this social mirror, that we kind of live up to our expectations unless we take control of our destiny. We kind of see ourselves the way other people see us. And dramatically enough that in this classroom, the dumb students did better than the good students when the teachers got mixed up, or when the company got mixed up with the grades on this test. And the parents and, the teachers said, oh, these are our best students, these are our worst students. And everything turned out that way until they found out, oops, they were wrong, and then everything flipped back again. So sometimes it's our social mirror that is causing us to think that we can't do something or whatever. And in fact, there is a variety of theories on achievement. One is genetic determinism. We are what our DNA says we are. One is psychic determinism. Basically, you are what your parents made you when you were a child. And another one is environmental determinism. The environment around us, our social economic environment around us determines what we will do, what we will accomplish. All of these social maps are kind of based on the idea that we don't have any control over ourselves. That our DNA, our parents, our circumstances control us. We don't control ourselves. And even in this sense, Dr. Covey is saying that's just not true. You don't control maybe 10%. But if your dad beats you physically, doesn't mean that you have to beat your child physically. Whatever, that you can make a decision. By the way, the odds are you will. I mean, that most people who beat their kids have been beaten as kids. So sometimes we learn bad habits. That doesn't mean we have to keep those habits, whatever they might be. Some kids are raised in homes where the parents start reading to them at an early age, and so they learn the value of reading. They don't maybe read yet, but by the time they get to kindergarten, they understand the value of words. And so some studies suggest that a child who's been read to by their parents is already, they come to kindergarten 2 years ahead of the kids whose parents didn't have that sort of a culture in their home. And so those kids don't even know what a book is hardly. They don't have a value for words. They don't have a value for the stories. And so they get to kindergarten and they're, according to some studies, like I said, 2 years. It's going to take them 2 years to get to where the other kids entering kindergarten are already at. And not because they were taught the alphabet and taught how to read yet, but because they just valued reading. And so it became a priority to them. There are things that will help determine, but it still is ultimately about 10%. Some of us take kind of a negative look at life. Do you know where I'm residing? Board City, that's where. But not for long. With a positive mental attitude, I can whip it. I think I'll make a lateral move to self-pity. Well, Garfield joke. One of the examples that Covey likes to talk about is, first off, he talked about what I was explaining earlier, that you have the stimulus and response. But in between the stimulus and response, just like that video was showing, you have the freedom to choose. You don't have to choose to yell at your daughter. You don't have to choose to start off the day bad and be so consumed by your anger that you forget your briefcase and everything else goes bad the rest of the day, and you cause problems still in your home when you get back. Your wife and daughter are upset with you. You don't have to take that road. It may be natural to do it for many of us, especially if, again, go back to our parents. If that's how our parents would have reacted, guess what? We're more likely to act that way. I was blessed to have parents who didn't act that way. And I really appreciate them now maybe more than ever, that they were extremely loving, not in the sense of always saying it, but I don't remember ever being yelled at for spilling something, for example. They just cleaned it up and we went on, to try to be more careful. Just more or less what they're showing in the video. And in many other things and other circumstances in life, same thing. I mentioned Pavlov's dogs, but there's maybe another example might be interesting is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a determinist psychologist. I'm not sure if he's a psychologist or psychiatrist, but he worked, I think he's a psychiatrist, which means he also has a medical degree, in actually Austria before World War II, and Germany then took over Austria. He was a professor. He was as I mentioned, a psychiatrist in a hospital. He believed that pretty much people did not control their destiny, that they were controlled by the things we were talking about, DNA, parenting, environment. He did not believe that people had much control over themselves. And then when Hitler gained control over Austria and much of that portion of the world, he ultimately ended up in prison with his family or in concentration camp. Many of his loved ones and his friends and other people in the concentration camp just died by just giving up. They thought their life was futile. They knew that some people were being killed already, and they just basically just died. They had no will to live. And he kind of started off that way. And then one day he was literally standing in the barracks naked. Everything had been deprived. They had very little to eat and so forth. And then he laid down in his bunk for a second, and then he just started imagining his life before. Not in a way of pitying himself, but actually it was a way of escaping the concentration camp. He remembered back at the university where he was teaching and how much he enjoyed that. He enjoyed his work working with people who had psychological problems. And he remembered the cabin the family had up in the mountains and how much he enjoyed going up in the mountains. And so in his mind, he escaped from the concentration camp. But then beyond that, he started thinking about, they didn't take all my freedom away. They didn't take my freedom of imagination away. What other freedom did they not take away from me? And so they started a university at the concentration camp. There were a lot of smart people there. And so they started teaching each other classes and continuing to grow and to gain knowledge and understanding. He then even started thinking about the guards around the concentration camp, and he became friendly with the guards because he realized the guards did not want to be guards either. They didn't want to be there. They were being commanded and threatened to be in the army or whatever position they were in, and so they didn't control their lives any more than he did in a way. They had better lives than he did, but they had no more control because somebody was telling them what to do. And so he actually, as I said, became friends with the guards who were keeping him in the concentration camp. But over those years in the concentration camp, many of his loved ones died. But when he got out, he wrote a book about basically about proactivity, about how you could be free and how you could change your life even if you're in a concentration camp. There's certain freedoms that they can't take from you. And when he got out, he was ready to be more powerful in a way of, he did start changing the world, literally. There are a number of videos on YouTube about him and some of his lectures and stuff. Very good lecturer, by the way. Funny and smart, for sure. And so he, after he got out, did change the world. I mentioned one of the authors, I forgot his name a second ago, but Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, wrote many of his novels while in a prison camp. And he would have to, he had a small piece of paper and he'd write down part of his novel, and he wrote really long novels. And then but he only had one little piece of paper. And so he'd write a little bit and then he would memorize it. And then he'd have to erase it and start over again, start the next part of his book. And so he became a Pulitzer Prize winner and a world changer in a prison. Nobel Peace Prize winner, I may have mentioned, from Egypt. Anyway, I forget his name now. But anyway, he did the same thing. He was thrown into prison. And that changed his life. Maybe we should all go to prison. Huh? I'm not sure what there is about this, but we know how much other people like Gandhi have also suffered in prison, and they come out stronger, not defeated, but stronger. And one thing that Solzhenitsyn said was, at some point you become freer than ever. You realize you have nothing more to lose. All they can do is kill you. It actually relieves the pain, so it's no big deal. They're not even afraid of death at some point. And so they live their life free from fear, and let their passion rule them rather than their fear, because they no longer have that fear of death anymore because they've suffered so much. So proactivity is basically the ability to control one's environment rather than have it control you, as is often the case. Self-determination determination, choice, and power to decide response to stimuli, conditions, and circumstances. So a proactive person takes responsibility for everything in his life. I've never been without a job, but I have been fired from jobs. I've always had another job waiting for me. So luckily, I've never suffered from being fired. But I have been fired unjustly by people who didn't like my proactivity, basically. And if you would, God has blessed me in spite of that. And I've not, like I said, not suffered a day, particularly for being proactive. But there are people that are going to be problematic in your life. And sometimes it'll be because you're proactive, because that's a threat to them. And they can't handle that. And so you have to be willing to accept the fact that being proactive sometimes, on one hand, will help you go up the ladder. And every so often, somebody's going to kick you down the ladder because that person doesn't want you going up that ladder. But if you keep going, you're going to get up higher than he is ultimately. But be ready to get kicked once in a while. That's part of life. And so being proactive, you have to understand that. Is that that your passion is such that you're willing to be kicked down the ladder a little bit once in a while. And that will happen. I can pretty much guarantee it. You'll get kicked down. But anyway, the proactive person takes responsibility. So let's say you get fired. Your responsibility is, let me see, how did that happen? Could I have done something differently? Or is this something that would have happened no matter what? For me being proactive, is this something I have to accept in my life and I just go on and continue to be proactive? So is there something I can learn from the lesson, and maybe I can be friendlier with that person, maybe help him feel more successful and maybe less threatened? But whatever, you really don't dwell on the fact that somebody did something unjust to you, because it doesn't do any good. One person that basically refused to renew my university contract ended up being the very top person in all of the University of New York system. The State University of New York has, 20 or more universities. And so the president of the college I was at, because he was political and could not, I won't go into detail, but couldn't handle my proactivity, would not renew my contract. He ended up being the chancellor over entire SUNY system, entire system. And of course, that's the sort of person you'd expect to get up there, somebody who's very political, somebody who's going to kiss the right rear ends or whatever to get what he wants. My being angry with him would do me no good. Luckily, I had another job before my contract ran out, and it was a job that actually probably did help a lot in my professional career. So I do believe that there is, whatever you want to call it, intervention by God or whatever you want to call it. I think there is a lot of times, maybe not every time. I can't say there is, but I've always felt blessed that when I've run into people like this, it hasn't bothered it. I've just gone on, no problem. Anyway, the reactive person blames other people, circumstances, or for obstacles or problems, and he ends up dwelling on that stuff. And there's no, it ends up his being angry about it and dwelling on what somebody did to him ends up undermining his own continuing progress. You can't afford to do that. If you want to be proactive, you have to accept somebody's going to kick you down the ladder once in a while. That's going to happen. Will absolutely happen. So in here, between stimulus and response, are these things like self-awareness. Who do I want to be? What do I want to be? What kind of character do I want to have? Your imagination. Again, Viktor Frankl and people in prison. Using their imagination, even though they were in chains, basically, they used their imagination to free themselves from their chains in a way to become great people in spite of their being imprisoned even. Conscience. What is really important to me? What do I think is right or wrong? What am I willing to die for? What am I passionate about? Independent will, I will do what I feel is right, no matter what somebody else says. These sorts of things then help determine what will I do when I'm hit with this stimulus. It may be a very negative stimulus. What will be my reaction? So we saw the video already about Covey's 90-10 rule, that we can't control 10%, but we can control probably 90%. And even in some of that stuff we don't think we could control, we could go back and analyze it and see what did we do wrong. Maybe there was something that I could have done differently with that college president that would have made him feel less threatened without sacrificing my principles. Now, I'm not sure that I could have, because I was teaching journalism students to be good journalists, and basically he wanted me to stop teaching them to be good journalists because they were causing problems with some people, because they're writing stories that some people didn't like them writing. So I kept doing my job, and he did his job the way he wanted to do it. Taking the initiative to make things happen, to sell solutions. Don't gripe about problems, sell solutions, and use your resourcefulness and initiative. One of the stories Covey tells is of a man working in a company where the boss was a very negative person, didn't trust people, didn't respond to them well, didn't have a good interpersonal relationship with his employees. And the people, and I've seen some of this in my career, people who are reactive in nature, what they do is they stand around the water cooler, the water fountain, and or the kitchen where they're getting their coffee or whatever, and they talk about the boss. Oh, do you hear what the boss did now? And they spend all their time criticizing the boss and what the boss did wrong here, and oh, I want this new job, and the boss is destroying the company, and this and that, all the time. All they do is talk about it. They don't do anything about it. But this one guy at this company decided he would do something about it. And so he was, first off, getting his work done. And then he went into the boss one day and gave him something he had done for the boss and said, by the way, I'm on top of my stuff. Is there anything I can do for you? Anything else I can do for you? I do have some time now that I could help you with something else. And at first the boss didn't really believe him. He just kind of thought, you're just talk. People talk, but they don't really do. But after he had done this a couple of times, the boss said, well, I do have this situation. And so he gave him another assignment. And the guy worked really hard at it, did a good job with it, and brought back the assignment soon. And the boss was really impressed with what he did. Covey said there's two things that are really important related to this, and that was trustworthiness and competency. So first off, the boss had to know he could be trusted, and secondly, he had to be competent at it. Another more positive circumstances in my life, I've had exactly that happen. When I first got to this university in Kazakhstan, they sent out a request for volunteers to work on their international research conference, and I thought, well, I've got some extra time, I'll go help them out. And so I got there, and the research conference had been created by the College of Business. I was in the College of Social Sciences. And most of the people involved were people from the business college. But anyway, they would ask for volunteers to do this or that, and I don't even remember what it was I did, frankly. But what I do remember is after months of working with this committee, and I was one of about 15 people, on the last meeting before the conference actually happened, the chairman he said there's 7 things that have to be done between now and next week when the conference occurs. And he asked me to do 4 of them. Again, there were 15 people in the room. I was 1 out of 15, and he asked me to do 4 of the 7 things that had to be done. Now, I thought a lot about that because, again, I wasn't doing it to, kiss up to him. He wasn't even in my college. He had no influence on my future, I didn't think. Actually, it turned out he did, but I didn't think he did because he wasn't in a direct line of authority to me. But I was just trying to help out, trying to do something good. And so they had learned during those few months that I was competent and trustworthy. And so 4 out of 7 things I had to do. And then on the very day of the conference, I get this call. Actually, I had 2 calls. The first call, I believe, was from the chairman of the committee, and he said, Ken, you have to be the MC, the master of ceremonies, in our big meeting where we have, it was a 3-day conference, but they have a hall that has room for 400 people. And so they said in the big initial meeting, in our great hall, they called it, you need to be the master of ceremonies. And I said, why me? And I said, oh, it just has to be you. And I thought, I had to me, I could see no, I said, first off, I said, you're the chairman of the committee. You should be the master of ceremonies. And he said, no, you need to do it, Ken. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And then as soon as he hangs up, I get a call from the dean of the business college. Again, not my direct line of authority, but he calls me up and says, Ken, he apparently didn't talk to the chairman of the committee, said, Ken, you have to be the master of ceremonies. And I said, you're the dean of the college, of the biggest college in our university. More than half the students go to your college. You should be the master of ceremonies. He said, no, Ken, we need you to be the master of ceremonies. So with very little preparation, I went up and I was from my perspective, not a very good master of ceremonies. It's not something I do very much. But when the whole thing got over, I remember everybody, all the leaders came out and some of our guests, and they decided to take a picture after this first opening meeting. And so there were about maybe 60 people, and there was a stairway, so they had us on the stairs, and I stood in the back row. And people started yelling, Ken, you need to come up the front. You're in charge of this. I'm not in charge of this. I wasn't the chairman. I have no position, so I stayed in the back row. But I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying, actually, I just found it very odd. A couple of years later, even though I was the first person not in the College of Business to become the chairman of that conference, and they had me do it 2 years in a row, and we did set records. We did do good things with it. But my point was, I started off by just doing stuff like, just nothing, whatever little thing they wanted me to do, I helped out with. And I honestly do not have a clue why they came to the conclusion that I was their superhero. I have no idea, because I didn't intend to be. But that led to lots of other things, like I said, to be the chairman of the international conference, to be the head of distance learning, to be a lot of things that happened to me. Started off with me just going up and showing up and being trustworthy and competent. And I'd say minimally competent in some of the things they had me doing. So trustworthy, I think, was actually more important. Just do it. Somebody who would do it. Anyway, this guy, going back to this company, the boss just became more and more dependent on him. He began trusting him. He knew he was competent, and he knew he was trustworthy. Those 2 things that Covey talked about. And so he became more and more powerful. And he also, you would have thought then, maybe the employees would think, that, son of a, that traitor, that brown noser, whatever you want to call him. But instead, he used his position to become the interface between the workers and the boss. The boss had a terrible relationship with the workers, but he didn't. And so he'd talk to them, he'd work with them, he'd find out their good ideas, he'd bring their good ideas back. He'd be sure to tell the boss who had the idea. And so he became a very positive force in helping the workers coordinate and to give their ideas, share their ideas, and help the company become better. The company became much better because he was there to become that interface between the boss and the employees. But it would not have happened if he had just sat around the water cooler or the coffee maker or whatever, complaining about the boss. He decided to be proactive and do something positive. And that's a key to proactivity, is that you have to be willing to do stuff when nobody else is willing to. You need to develop your proactive muscles, so to speak, and become used to being the guy. If you will, as me in that stupid conference, again, it's not the biggest thing I ever did in my life, but it's an example of this, because without any intention of doing it, I was exercising my proactive muscles. I didn't have to do it. It was something I was doing in my free time. You know, I definitely was a positive and a creative force, but basically I was mostly trustworthy and semi-competent. And they decided I had to do all this stuff. So it just starts off with that attitude and goes from there. Different language. People who are proactive and reactive have a different, even different language. The reactive person, oh, there's nothing I can do. That's just the way I am. He makes me so mad. He makes me so mad. He makes me so mad. Okay? No, you get mad. He did something to give you some stimulus, that's true. But ultimately, you choose whether you're going to be mad. So the proactive person looks, let's look at the alternatives. I can choose a different approach. I can control my feelings. Here's some more. They'll be in the PowerPoint. They'll be on Moodle, but I'm not going to spend any time on it here. And I might come back to this. This is a video. This is a relatively short video also that talks about basically the same principle by Jack Canfield. Some of you know him from the book, The Chicken Soup for the Soul series. I understand that's used quite a bit in China as a kind of an English textbook, reading book. One of the things that then Covey says is, you know, we're all concerned about certain things in the world. And so we have this circle of concern. And then we have a circle of influence. What I've discovered is exactly what Dr. Covey says in the book is a proactive person builds this circle of influence. And that's basically what happened. Again, if I go back to this conference, that's what was happening. Is suddenly I was the new guy. I'd only been on campus for a couple of months. And just by being trustworthy and competent, my influence started growing and growing and growing until they wanted me, you know, they wanted me to do a lot more stuff. If people wanted something done, they'd come to me to do it because I was a person who was trustworthy and competent. And there are a lot of other people that were either not trustworthy or they were incompetent, one or the other. And you have to have both. You really do have to have both. You have to be competent, which is also a matter of some effort on your part to be competent. But competence does no good at all if you're not trustworthy. You're not going to expand your influence if you're not trustworthy. It is possible, if you're trustworthy, by the way, to expand your influence to amazing limits, even if you're fairly incompetent. And I'll tell you a story about that in just a second. Not about me, but about somebody else. So you can actually build it gradually, and until I have another slide towards the end, but I'll give the punchline away here. You can actually build this until your influence is bigger than your circle of concern. And that has happened to me. In other words, people want you to do stuff that you're really not concerned about. You just do not do it. But because your influence has grown to such a state, now they're asking you to do stuff you don't want to do, and that may be a point where you actually have to start saying no sometimes, because you can't exert your influence in places where you really want to do it, because you're being asked to do stuff that you're not really that concerned about it. And so there is a point, and as we go on with Dr. Covey's habits, you'll see where that can be applied, where maybe you just have to say no, where your influence and your concern more or less meet, and then you start saying no when suddenly people start pushing you outside your area of concern, because you have your limits. You only have 24 hours a day. And so if you start doing stuff that aren't part of your passion, you may still be competent and trustworthy because you built the habit of being competent and trustworthy. And so that's why they keep pushing you beyond what your area of concern is. And so at some point, you're really better off, if you're going to achieve what you're passionate about, to be able to say no sometimes. But this will happen. If you're trustworthy and competent, it will happen if you're proactive. And that's the key, being proactive. So you have lots of problems. Some things you have no control over. Some things you may have indirect control over. Some things you have direct control over. And so you need to analyze what that is and go and go after it. Go, exert your influence where you can. And anyway, instead of being that sort of guy, or instead of being kind of fatalistic, oh darn, and just as I was beginning to take charge of my life, there's death, that you would be more like this sort of guy, where you will be proactive and you will accomplish amazing things. Now, whatever your goal may not be Gandhi's goal. Your goal may be more financial, whatever it is. That's up to you to decide what your goal is. We've talked about it before, that some people set goals and then when they get there realize that their life is somewhat meaningless. We talked about actors from Hollywood in that situation, who get there and ask themselves, is this all there is? Famous, rich, influential, and very disappointed in life. That's all there is. So choosing your path, choosing your passion, choosing what you're going to do, where you're going to focus your proactivity is extremely important. And that's actually the next habit we'll talk about next week. But before that, I mentioned you expand it, and so somebody else made this PowerPoint and I adapted it for myself, but I don't know who that is. But anyway, he's funny anyway. So again, we need to, when we make commitments, it's easy to plan and to promise, but it's much harder to actually keep promises. That's part of your trustworthy side. People have to, being trustworthy is absolutely as equally important as being competent. In fact, I would say that probably in the example I gave you, I was much more trustworthy than I was competent. I was the new kid in the block. I didn't know what was going on. But by being trustworthy, I got shoved to the front. So it's harder to keep promises and commitments than it is to actually make them. And so when we get to that point, if we want to be proactive, we have to be the trustworthy ones. And that may start, by the way, literally. I'm not saying this as a joke. Literally, it may start with putting the chairs away after the meeting. Literally. You put up chairs for a meeting, everybody else takes off, and you put the chairs away. And the chairman realizes you're the one that stayed after to clean up and take care of stuff. That's his first hint that you're the trustworthy one. Everybody else took off, you stayed and put the chairs away. That could be actually the first step in gaining influence with somebody at that point that's more powerful. So anyway, the power of making and keeping commitment is the essence of developing basic effective habit of proactivity. And ultimately, as I said, your area of influence can spread and spread until it actually is bigger than your area of concern. And I want to tell you this story. Covey says that, did I already share you this story with him, about him? No? Okay. I shared it the other day. There were a group of about 20 educators here from schools around the area, and I shared this with them. That's why I get it mixed up in my mind. But anyway, Covey makes a statement in his book that people who are proactive are 5,000 times more effective than people who are reactive. What do you think? Is that possible? To me, even though I'm a big 7 Habits fan, I questioned that. I thought, nah, that's kind of an exaggeration. But then I thought of this kid, Johnny the Bagger. Let me tell you about Johnny the Bagger. Now I'm actually going to have to stop this and change. Okay, so this is a story by basically Barbara Glantz. This is her. She's a customer service expert. And anyway, as it proceeds to tell us in the story,